Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Topic of the day, you do not need me to tell you. Wednesday was the NBA draft deadline. If you care about college hoops, you know all about it, okay? It was basically the day in which, if you wanted to return to college basketball, if you were testing the NBA draft waters and you wanted to return to college basketball, you had to go ahead and do it and make your announcement by end of day Wednesday, midnight Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific. And when I tell you it was a wild day, crazy day, it was an insane day. Started before 9 a.m. Eastern with Tristan Newton from UConn announcing he was going to return. Went all the way up till right around midnight Eastern with the final name or two. It was a crazy day, and it's time to react. And so there was so much to peel back. There was so much to discuss. I want to do winners and losers. I think Zach Edey is probably the most notable name from the day, but I want to get to the biggest story. I'm a story guy. I'm a narrative guy. I'm a topic guy. And I want to start with the biggest loser. And the biggest loser is a program that we've talked about a lot. If you're not a fan of Kentucky basketball, forgive me, but this is the biggest story in college sports right now. As Kentucky, it has been just a disastrous offseason. For those of you who have not paid attention, I've kind of talked about it a few times, but here is what has happened at Kentucky over the last couple months, okay? Lose to Kansas State in the second round of the NCAA tournament. From there, you have the normal, mechanisms, what they call machinations, whatever you want to call it, of the offseason. Couple guys declare for the draft. Couple guys enter the portal. Couple guys test the NBA draft waters. And so what you were left with coming into the draft deadline was a very thin roster, as Kentucky has essentially, I don't want to say they've sat out of the transfer market because they went after Hunter Dickinson, they went after Keyshawn Johnson, but I didn't think they were aggressive enough. We're going to get to that in a minute. And what Kentucky was left with coming into the deadline day was this: a 5-man high school recruiting class that admittedly is very good, number 1 class in the country, 4 top 10 players, probably 3 lottery picks in DJ Wagner, Aaron Bradshaw, and Justin Edwards. So it's not a complete disaster. But outside of those 5 freshmen, you have 1 redshirt freshman, Ugana Onyenso, who played in 1 SEC game this year, and you have a true sophomore, Adu Thiero, who, as I've said a few times, plays hard, like the kid, respect him, but he's probably a year away from being a real contributor. That is what Kentucky had coming into NBA draft deadline day. And that is why draft deadline day was so big for them. 3 players were on the fence about coming back. The former National Player of the Year, Oscar Tshiebwe, Antonio Reeves, a sharpshooter, big game, 37 points in the regular season finale at Arkansas, Chris Livingston, a former 5-star who had his moments but didn't really click. I'll be blunt, didn't really feel like Chris Livingston was ever planning on coming back. But going into the day, there was hopes that the other 2 would come back because none of the 3 are projected in most any major NBA mock draft. Well, here's the good news. Kentucky technically didn't go 0 for 3, but as my buddy Nick Roush, who covers football for Kentucky Sports Radio, joked, he said, Kentucky went 1/2 of 3. Oscar Tshiebwe is staying in the NBA draft. Chris Livingston is staying in the NBA draft. Antonio Reeves announced he was going to come back, but did not commit to coming back to Kentucky. Now, reports, multiple people, Jack Pilgrim was the one I saw put it out there, is that he's maybe going to consider testing the waters, but it's really about NIL. It's about role. It's about making sure that Kentucky is right for him going forward. And by the way, he should look at all his options. That's perfectly okay. But with it, Kentucky was undoubtedly the biggest loser on the NBA draft deadline day. And more importantly, Kentucky has a very contentious situation with its roster going into next season. Now, we'll get to, I think there are 1 or 2 positives in a second. But what this comes down to, and it's something I've been talking about since early April. Remember, players can start entering the portal in mid-March now. And in early April, I sent out a tweet April 5th. It was the day after I got home from the Final Four. I said, Kentucky is moving awfully slow in the transfer portal. And I had a ton of people, oh, Torres, you don't know what you're talking about. You have no sources. You're an idiot. You're this, you're that. And what I said was, listen, I'm not saying you have to have 7 commitments lined up, but you cannot wait in the portal. You can't take a week, 10 days to evaluate a kid before, oh, I'm going to grace them with a Kentucky offer. That's not how the portal works. Kids move fast, schools move fast, commitments move fast, and you have to move fast with Kentucky. And so I said it on draft deadline day Wednesday, and I'm going to stand by it. The Arkansas approach to the portal is the way that you need to operate in 2023. Now, Eric Musselman, love the guy, takes it to an extreme, but Eric Musselman, when you see a list of every marquee portal player and Arkansas is on the list, understand it's not a game, it's not a gimmick, it's not cute, it's not funny. What Eric Musselman is essentially doing is he is reaching out to everybody to get a feel for who's good, who's not, who might be interested, who isn't, who's about NIL, who wants to actually play, what's my good role going to be, all that good stuff. So that if anything happens, you have a backup plan. And if the backup plan falls through, you have a backup plan to a backup plan. And that's why they reach out to 75, 80, 90 kids. And it's also why their roster's largely set going into draft deadline day. If you play at Arkansas, you know, if I'm going to test the NBA draft waters, Coach Muss is going to recruit over me. And so I said 8 weeks ago, if you're Kentucky, you can't wait until the NBA draft deadline and hope good stuff happens. You have to move quicker. You have to get yourself settled. And I just believe this has been a train wreck of a situation at Kentucky. Now, what I would say about that is this, is that, listen, a couple things. One, it falls on Cal. There's no other way to it. There's nothing else to put it, but it has been a train wreck. You cannot wait. You cannot wait until the end of May to try and figure out what works, what doesn't, what's good, what's not, what's this, what's that. You have to have answers. You have to have backup plans to backup plans, and you cannot wait. And so I bring it up because, listen, I don't know how much longer the Calipari era is going to go on. I have a saying on this show. I don't call for Cal's job because ultimately at the end of the day, most years he's going to have you in contention and in position. I know the last couple of years have been disappointing, but it doesn't change the fact that most seasons, things are actually not in terrible shape. And so I bring it up because, listen, this is kind of a come to you-know-what moment for Kentucky basketball. If Calipari continues after next season, and right now there's no indication that he's going to step away, you have to have a different approach in the portal. You have to move quicker. You have to think quicker. You have to evaluate quicker. I'll be blunt. Not only do you have to evaluate quicker, let's take it a step further. You have to, in some cases, know about guys that are going to enter the portal before they enter the portal. I've said it many times. If you are waiting until the draft deadline to evaluate a player, to reach out to a player, to even know, or excuse me, if you're waiting for a player to enter the portal before you evaluate him or are even aware of who he is, you're too far behind. There are guys that are entering the portal that already know where they want to go, that know where they want to visit, that have it down to 1 or 2 schools. You cannot wait. And so I'm not going to go on. And what I will say is, from Kentucky's perspective, I do think there are a few positives. One, I think ultimately you're going to get Antonio Reeves back. That is a positive, end of story, no doubt about it. Beyond that, I would also say, listen, criticize a lot, but a couple things. The freshmen, Calipari's best teams have always been a ton of freshmen and NBA talent at the freshman spot, specifically at the point guard spot. DJ Wagner is that, and I believe that DJ Wagner can put Kentucky in a position to have success next year alongside Justin Edwards, who I think will be really good. And last thing on Kentucky, there is one positive, and that is that Arthur Kaluma, who I believe is the best player in the portal still, announced that he is withdrawing from the NBA draft and has decided that he will come back to college but enter the transfer portal. 13.5 points per game, didn't hit enough three-pointers, but this is an NBA-type talent. And Jeff Borzello put out a list of schools that he's considering, and Kentucky is very high up on that list. For Kentucky, this, listen, no more excuses. You got to go get this guy. And don't tell me about your NIL, because here's the thing, right? I hear Kentucky fans say, oh, our NIL, we're behind in our AD this and Calipari that. NIL isn't affecting the football program. It's not. So don't tell me it's about NIL. If it's about playing with freshmen, you got to figure out a way. And Kaluma is the one guy. He wants to be a one and done. He doesn't want to be in college. He wants to go to a place where he can ball out, have success, go pro, get drafted. If you're Kentucky, you got to get him. And then you got to find some other guys in the portal as well. Because what I will say is, yes, it's late, but you can still find role players in the portal. And don't tell me nobody wants to be a role player. Don't tell me that nobody wants to be a role player. At the end of the day, I still believe that for Kentucky, there are players you can get. I'm a UConn alum. Joey Calcaterra, if you remember, key part of the national championship team. He didn't commit until last year in late June, early July. So there are still guys. He played a role. He was important. Kentucky, you've got to move.